Hello everyone, my name is Mirko, and in today's video we're going to be giving you guys some season 3 aiming tips to help you guys improve your aim, whether you're on console or PC. This video is designed to help all kinds of players. If you guys do go ahead and enjoy today's video, be sure to show your support, drop a like down below, be sure you're subscribing to the channel if you're currently not subscribed. We're going to cover things like first shot accuracy, sensitivity, and also loads of other aspects that will really help you improve your aim. So if we go through the gunfight experience that you have in Apex Legends and we narrow down each section, then it's going to make this video a lot easier. So the first part is the initial snapping on to the target, which I think is actually the hardest step. Now I can't explain how important first shot accuracy is, especially if you're using a fully auto gun. If you don't have that first shot accuracy, then whilst your gun is recoiling, it's going to be much more harder to line up your sights with the enemy when your gun is recoiling all over the place. That's why if you do land your first bullet onto the enemy, that aim assist should also help you on your way if you're playing on console. But we're going to talk about the follow through a little bit later on in the video. At the moment we're looking at that initial snapping onto the target because that's the first step of a gunfight, and one way you can really help improve your snapping is going into training and do what I'm doing on screen. A successful snap is aiming to the target and then your sights staying onto the target after you've aimed. The goal is to not have to readjust your aim after you've started shooting, and if you want to have 100% accuracy from the get-go, then you want to make sure that you practice your snapping onto targets in training mode, as that's really going to help you improve, and it's also a really good way of warming up before you start playing a game of Apex Legends. You want to keep turning until you feel like your aim has lined up with the target, and then let go of your right stick and see if you would have been accurate if it would have been a real enemy. If you're having to readjust your aim and you're off target quite a lot, then you want to look out for two things. The first thing is over aiming. That's essentially when you're aiming past the intended target, then you might want to start decreasing your sensitivity if this is happening on a very often basis. And the next thing you want to look out for is under aiming. Under aiming is basically not being able to actually reach the target and coming short ever so slightly. That's when you might want to increase it. And when you are messing around with your sensitivity, something I like to say and give advice is only increase it or decrease it by 1 each time. If you have a 2 sensitivity and you jump it straight up to a 5, that's going to be a huge change, and your muscle memory is already used to a very low sensitivity, so you might want to bear that in mind and only do little adjustments each time. Another thing I will say is that you're not going to be accurate 100% of the time, so sometimes you won't hit your shots. Doesn't mean your sensitivity needs to be changed, it just means that you're human and you haven't got aimbot built into you. Only change your sensitivity when you're missing on a very often basis and change things up. I mean, even pro players like Shroud, Dizzy, you name them, they miss a lot of shots. If you watch their live streams, you will see that they are also human themselves. Of course, they have good accuracy, that's why they're known and popular, but they're not going to be 100% accurate, and a lot of people feel like they need to change their sensitivity just if they're having a bad day, and that's definitely not the case. And if you do change your sensitivity on a very often basis, that's actually going to make your aim worse because you don't build up any muscle memory, and muscle memory is an important part to being consistent. So that's the first step done. You've landed your first shot into the enemy. Now the next thing we're going to speak about is tracking, essentially finishing off the gunfight, being able to stay on target whether the enemy is jumping up and down, strafing side to side. The tracking part is essentially the part that's going to finish off the enemy. So the first thing I just want to completely get out of the way is if you're in a situation where you're engaging with an enemy at close range, and I mean extremely close range, you want to be hip firing. The reason why you want to be hip firing is because number one, you maintain your field of view, and number two, you don't have a very low aim in sensitivity. When you're aiming in, your sensitivity is decreased by such a huge amount, and up close, enemies are going to be all over your screen. It is virtually impossible to track enemies up close whilst aiming down sights unless you have the highest ADS sensitivity, which also isn't a good choice to be using because you're going to be suffering at their medium to long range engagements. Hip firing also increases bullet spread, so if enemies are jumping all around, then you'll be able to have a better chance of landing shots into them, and we're only talking about extremely close ranges when you want to be hip firing, almost ranges where you could melee someone, as enemies will be all over your screen. It's going to be much harder to aim in and shoot them, and you're better off hip firing. So the first thing I want to talk about in regards to tracking are a question that floats around in a lot of FPS games, and that is, do I look at the sights when shooting enemies, or do I look at the enemies and not look at the sight? That is a question that gets asked about all sorts of FPS games, including Call of Duty, and the answer to that is essentially you want to be looking at the enemy, because the sights are in the middle of your screen at all times, whatever sight you are using, so you can get used to that, but the enemies aren't always going to be in the same place. If you play on PC, there is an aim training game that is free to download, and it has really hard moving targets that move in unpredictable patterns, and it's meant to help you in regards to adjusting to situations and adjusting to your aim. I'll leave a link down below for you PC players that want to check it out. It's used by a lot of pro players, and this is what they use to train their aim, so I'll definitely recommend you guys check it out. And unfortunately for us console players, there isn't something like this available at the moment, but I do strongly believe that we will see something like this launch for console players in the near future, as there is a huge demand for console players to have an aim training program that they can use to help their aim. When it comes to tracking your opponent, I see many people get relaxed during a gunfight, and when the opponent eventually moves to a different direction, they take a long time to then adjust to that situation. So every time you go into a gunfight, always be prepared for the worst and be prepared for an enemy to move either side. If you mentally prepare yourself next time you go into a gunfight that the enemy could start moving either side, then naturally, if you've prepared for it, you will adjust your aim much more faster. And if you're still struggling with your aim, then look back on what you're doing wrong. Maybe you're under aiming or you're over aiming, as I spoke about earlier, and you might want to change your sensitivity. Now, when it comes to sensitivity, I recommend using a low one for the long term, although it's a personal choice and there is no such thing as a best sensitivity. The higher you go in regards to your sens, then the more aim you're going to sacrifice and the more accuracy you're going to lose. That's just how sensitivity works. If you want me to recommend a good starting out sensitivity, I would go with a 3 or a 4 ADS sensitivity and then see how you get on. If you feel like you can increase it, then go for the increase by 1, or if you feel like it's a bit too much and your aim is slightly off, start decreasing it and you will find your right sensitivity. But don't keep changing it on a regular basis. That's the worst thing you can do, and you want to start building up your muscle memory on one specific sensitivity. Now, the last thing I want to speak about is control freaks. Now, control freaks, I'm sure you guys have heard what they are. They are an add-on to your thumb grips to give you a higher and wider area of aim, so you can really focus on them pinpoint areas. They are fairly cheap, and if you want to invest a little into control freaks, I really do recommend them, as ever since I started using them, I've been using them for about 5 years and I haven't stopped using them since. They have helped my aim significantly, and although you can still do well without a control freak, by having one can just help you have that edge. It all depends if you want to invest money into your setup, but if you want some advice, I would go for it. They're only, I think, £11 or around $13, but that choice is completely up to you. So anyway guys, that's going to be all of the tips I've got in today's video. As always, if you guys did go ahead and enjoy today's video, be sure to drop a big like down below. My name's been Mirko, it's been a pleasure, and I'll catch all of you guys out in another brand new Apex Legends video.